Today on PBR, we're sitting down with Mikaela Gaveletz, a trans activist. Welcome everyone to Power Rainbows. I am, of course, your host, Professor Pride, and today I'm sitting down with Mikaela Gaveletz, a trans activist and head of Yes Empowerment Program, and also the founder and director of the Pottsville Pride event that you've seen on our channel before. But before we get to that interview, first off, don't forget to like this video, comment down below your LGBTQ-friendly thoughts, hit that rainbow subscribe button so you don't miss out on new episodes, and share this video with others. Now, Mikaela, if you wanted to tell us about yourself and your preferred pronouns.
Well, hi. Again, as the professor said, I am Mikaela Gaveletz. My preferred pronouns are her and she. I am, as Matt stated, founder and director of Pottsville Pride, inaugural Pottsville Pride last year, and CEO of Youth Empowerment and Support, LGBTQ Schuylkill.
Awesome. So I kind of want to just start off this whole interview with kind of easy questions for the people that want to learn more and maybe they don't know anything initially here. Can you maybe define transgender and gender dysphoria to our audience?
Absolutely. That's a great question right out of the gate. Something that is very important in establishing the difference between the two. Your transgender is a term that would describe an individual who's transitioning from one gender to the other, whereas the phrase gender dysphoria is more of a medical term, a diagnosis, if you will, just giving the medical community something to grasp onto to say, okay, this is what we're dealing with. Somebody who has gender dysphoria may have thoughts of transitioning from one gender to the other.
Okay. And a lot of people get this confused in talking about transgenderism, especially in the debates that we'll get into later in the interview. And people sometimes get sex and gender confused because you're sex assigned at birth, gender identity, and gender expression. So what is the difference between sex and gender?
Okay, well, I got to tell you, sex and gender have nothing to do with each other. Sex would be what you're assigned at birth based on your outward genitals, whereas gender is more perceived in your heart and your mind. That's what you determine you are, how you feel. That's where we find or define gender.
Okay. And I know in the studies that we've talked about before on the channel about the brain scans of transgender people and realizing that gender does live in your brain and, transgender people are, in fact, the gender they identify as, according to thousands of these studies now. And certainly there's more historical data to be done on this. But people also, in our comments especially, have been expressing their confusion on whether someone who expresses their gender dysphoria is everyone who is transgender experienced gender dysphoria, and does everyone who experienced gender dysphoria also happen to be transgender, or are they interchangeable?
Well, I would say that they are interchangeable, and in as such, when you talk about gender, there's such a wide variety of categories that this can fall under. There could be intersex people with Klinefelter disease, also known as androgen sensitive syndrome, which you are basically born with both sets of genitalia or ambiguous genitalia as a man and whatnot. So there are categories. There are also people, and this term it's not the best, one of my favorites, but autogynephilia, which is maybe perhaps you get a thrill out of seeing yourself, dressed as the opposite gender that you're presenting as. So there's such a sweep of gender phrases that we can go through and talk to. So each of them could be interchangeable. As you go and you discover yourself and find more out about yourself, I think you start to whittle that down within yourself. And you categorize yourself. In my case, I identified more with women in my life, and I identified and related to them, much more than I did with other boys. Though I played sports in high school and middle school and such, Uh, it was always the girls and the cheerleaders or the majorettes that I, related to, better. So I felt comfortable. My grandparents, all my influences in my life. I questioned my fluidity. Um, and I presented for a very long time as androgynous. So before we had all of the terms that we hear today, gender nonconforming or gender fluid, it was more androgyny for me. And so yes, you can float in and out of those, and putting a label on your gender is a vast category that you could swim through most of your life to discover and land where you're going to land. For me, finally coming out at age 56 here in Schuylkill County, it was a long and winding road to get here. So, and along the way, I've had these twists and turns. That's why they call it a journey, folks. You write your story.
You mentioned people who get a sexual pleasure out of dressing as the opposite gender. And I think that's where a lot of people might be confusing gender expression and transgenderism with drag performers. So I know there are drag performers who are also transgender.
Correct.
But a lot of people might say that's just a stepping stone to being transgender. And I wonder if you can comment on that. Yes. And the debate there.
I love this question because I'm going to start it out with a joke. It's a very old joke, albeit, and it's kind of corny, guys, so bear with me. What's the difference between a cross-dresser and a transsexual? The answer would be 2 years. Okay. So a lot of times, that is a stepping stone. That's a very valid point. But for the most part, most of the kings and queens that I know of, they take it off at the end of the night and they set it aside. That's a persona that they display on stage. Whereas, transgender people, we don't want to take it off. This is what we want. We want the skin 24/7. So there is a difference in that regard. And you're right. There are some cross-dressers out there who evolve into full-blown transgenderism, and some of them go all the way through gender-confirming surgery. So again, it's life is a journey, guys. Enjoy the ride. So,
all right, now I kind of want to take a shift, and obviously there are questions that, as Professor Pride, there are things that I know, but the audience doesn't. And some topics are more sensitive than others. But does the transgender community also serve as an umbrella term to define non-binary individuals, gender fluid, et cetera, et cetera?
Absolutely. The gender umbrella is so wide. There are so many terminologies that fall under the umbrella, and that is certainly every one that you mentioned is on point. Absolutely. It's hard, if you look at the history of transgender folks, two-spirited, people of our indigenous tribes here in continental United States. There had always been, some fluidity and spirit of people that we didn't have, words for. The cultures created their own words, so it's a whole different topic. We could go down that road someday and just spend a whole session talking about the history of trans people and all the notables as well.
I would love to do that. Oh my God, another topic for another day, another episode. Well, okay. So, with gender dysphoria, when we're talking about that, we know that sometimes that wears off in children, or at least according to scientific studies on this. And as they grow up, it sometimes wears off, but there's no real test to see if it does wear off or if it will, Yes. And so a lot of people accuse children of not really knowing their gender as young as they truly do, and as we know them to know their gender. So how can doctors help those with gender dysphoria? And where is that line to say someone is trans and not just experiencing some mild gender dysphoria?
Well, that's another fantastic question, and buried within your question is the answer to it all. Phases are phases. I can speak of my own experience to you really quick. I kind of knew at an early age. I'm going back maybe to age 5, age 6. And back in my days, if there was such a thing as Saturday morning cartoons, we didn't have Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network or Adult Swim 24/7. We had to wait for Saturday. But anyway, those were my earliest influences. When I was looking at Sabrina the Teenage Witch with the Archie crew, I was loving on that blue dress with the wide black belt and those little kitten heels that she wore, white bouffant with the headband. Yeah, that's the look I loved, And for a while, as a little child, I thought I'd always wanted to grow up to be a cartoon character, but it was my early influences. I mean, I loved Daphne from Scooby Doo. I mean, I love that outfit. Come on, guys. So on. So I knew from an early age, I was confident that this wasn't going to be a phase as I strived to learn how to twirl baton, played with Barbies with my neighbor girlfriend, and she was my cousins who were, the female cousins I absolutely loved because they're always dressed like, like little dolls. And it's like, oh, I want your mommy, we know it's not a phase. And it could be that children, and I've seen it with my own son. At times, he wanted to paint his fingernails. I'm like, hey, let's go do it, or whatever. But it was a phase for him. It wasn't anything he was going to expand on. I think parents know, especially mothers, have that maternal instinct about their children. And it's great that I read so many stories, positive stories about parents who let their children's spirits soar and they discover themselves and let it play out. Let's see if it's a phase. Let's see if it's something that's going to continue. But I believe there's in every child's life that is, transgender. They've often questioned their mommies if they could have a dress or if they could dress like that. For me, it was Barbara Eden and I Dream of Jeannie. I wanted to have that costume for Christmas. I mean, for Halloween. And, I wasn't taking no for an answer. I wanted to be I Dream of Jeannie until I was defeated in my decision. Ultimately, I wasn't Jeannie, but it was just to impress that some of us know from a very early age what direction we're going. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know in the research for what we do, we've learned that trans people, as they grow up, they don't call being trans a phase. They call their time in the wrong body as a phase. And it's just a phase that they had to go through. And so certainly that it's right on point with that. And I mean, I know the next logical question that a lot of opponents would ask is, how early do you think a child could know?
I think from all the examples that I've ever seen or heard of in my lifetime, I've seen them as early as age 3 and 4, displaying,
Wow.
Yes, displaying the traits of a girl, expressing to themselves the best they could as a 3 or a 4-year-old that that they are a girl and they will take no other answer. They were just so on point with that. You couldn't convince them otherwise. So yeah, that's how early it can actually go.
So kind of moving into our next chapter of the interview, as we go through the whole thing, if there's a certain topic that you want to learn more about during the video, on the play bar, you can scroll through and find the topic that you want to learn more about, certainly. But in this chapter, we're going to talk about growing up as trans, which we've already touched on a little bit here. But what are some initial signs that you might be transgender? Like, is it just a feeling inside that you were born in that wrong body, or how strong is that initially?
Right. I'll tell you this straight out. If you're even questioning that you're trans, you probably are. If that even crossed your mind. I mean, I don't want to, I could keep it as simple as that. But I think that's the best answer I can give you. If you're even questioning it, you probably are, or you're going to dabble in it. If it's not your cup of tea, again, I couldn't impress upon you more that life is a journey, and, be aware that it'll take twists and turns. You may declare yourself, as trans, and then later on in life, perhaps you're thinking, maybe I'm more non-binary. We'll stick to that. So I know people, even in the adult world um, that proclaimed that they were that trans, and then they kind of backed off to a non-binary status. So, you know, uh, there are no rules in life, guys. There, as far as the laws of nature are concerned, if you truly listen to your heart and your mind, it'll guide you in the right place.
Yeah. And we certainly know that gender fluid is a thing, and we know that gender is a spectrum, and so there's not just male, female, or non-binary or agender, but you can be on that whole spectrum and move across it your whole life. And I think that was a beautiful way to describe that. Kind of the next big topic that people always ask us about, and I try to give them the best answers that I have as a gay cisgender man, but obviously you have different experiences than I do, and you have a lot more research in this than I do, about coming out. So we'll get into coming out advice in just a moment in the interview, but before coming out, how do you know that you're trans before you come out to anyone as such? Because I know, at least in my experience as a gay man, I wanted to know for sure I was gay before I told anyone that.
Yes.
So if people are questioning their gender and they're saying, I think I'm this, but I'm not 100% yet, I don't know if I want to tell that first person, how can they be sure? And is it okay to tell someone before you're 100% sure?
Wow. Hey, that I love this question too, because I always quote this this writer who says, you really have to come out to yourself first before you can come out to anybody else. It's finding that confidence in yourself that now you're sure. For me, again, in my own personal experience, it was years of playing with my mother's makeup kit, or probably dabbling in the pretty dress that she had hanging in the closet, or something like this. And you find yourself being more and more drawn into the world that you choose. For me, I was loving, every minute of it, and along the way, learning how to do a little makeup, apply the lipstick in a proper manner, or this finding your right shade, whatever. It's the time you invest into it. When you're good and ready, you will come out to yourself first. I'm going, I like what I see in the mirror now. It's like, this is who I am. Just being confident in yourself first. And then coming out to the rest of the world, little by little in increments, start with your closest confidant, your friend, test the waters, Some people come out, in increments. Other people just dive in head first. It's completely your choice, but, be careful, that that you're going to affect people in many different ways. So you'll have different reactions along the way. So.
I mean, with coming out, we certainly tell people to test the waters, make sure it's safe to do so first, and we'll get into like the transphobia and stuff like that a little bit later, in a whole section just for that. But with it, we got this question I think pertains a lot to what you just said about trying on dresses and just feeling like that's right for you, and with it. There are some people that you come out to that might call you a tomboy or a femboy, and sort of look at you as that for a while until you just tell them, this is my gender. It's not just how I express myself. I don't just like dresses.
Yes.
And how do you deal with that?
Well, if anybody, like my brothers, for instance, if they ever said anything off color, not particularly pertaining to me, but perhaps something that might have been a slur, a homophobic comment, I would step up right away and pretty much tell them how insensitive and ugly that was, without really coming out to them and saying, hey, now you're barking up my tree. It's like, back off. But putting those little expressions out there, it's like, oh, come on, don't say that, or whatever, to let them kind of maybe plant that little seed in their mind too, that, hey, well, what's going on here, or with that little response. So planting seeds along the way and letting them grow and harvesting them as they come up, deal with it, in the moment. That's all I've ever done my whole life was, I step forward. I just do what I feel is the right thing for me, and I do it unapologetically. So it's like, I gave you all uh, the hints that I could without really coming out and blurting it out. It's like, hey, I'm trans, guys, get it. Um, yeah, for me, growing up in the '70s, it's more of a disadvantage because we really had no resources to really look at besides the library, which I might find a book on Renee Richards or Christina Jorgensen. That was it, and I could say that, and reading their stories, it's like, well, that really doesn't speak to me. I need, a little bit more. So, yeah.
So a lot of trans people, when they come out, they come out as homosexual first, before coming out because of who they're attracted to, and when in fact they're straight, they're just living in the wrong body for that moment. And for others, they might come out later as also homosexual and trans, just like yourself. But we know a lot of the community comes out as homosexual first, to almost test the waters in that way. So what's your opinion on this? And do you have any advice for someone who feels the need to come out twice like this? Is it any less believable the second time they have to come out?
Oh, I'm going to address your last question first. Again, as I said earlier, it is acceptable to come out twice, and there should be some reasonable expectation, as life again is a journey with many twists and turns, and you discover yourself as you go along. We all have our storyline. We all have the path we're taking. We all have the antagonist, the protagonist, in your story. So it may not be that that's the ending that you want. You feel it, you go in that other direction, and you present to the world, as such. It's like, it is evolving. It really truly is. And I do say to, people in my family, like, look, I have evolved. I've not stayed the same. And it is a process of evolution. As I also heard said, one isn't born a woman, one becomes a woman.
So one of our students asked, and I think it's important for especially the younger audience that we have, how do you express your gender identity without outing yourself as trans?
Trying my hardest not to become a caricature or, kind of overcompensating femininity, or in some people's cases, not overcompensating in masculinity, but finding that balance. That's why I spent so many years finding Mikaela, going out into the world, and step by step I went through my phases of having the ugly wig and maybe wearing those spiked stilettos that I had no woman has the right to ever walk around in, but we test these waters, so we evolve, we become ourselves. But it's a test to yourself. For me in particular, every time I looked in that mirror after I got done doing, makeup, put that wig on and buying that perfect wig so it gives you that perfect look. It's always it is an evolving thing, and you're always experimenting, seeing what works, and just becoming comfortable with your appearance. It was always a test for me. It's like, the look is on now. Okay, I could take it out into the world, and maybe I could, fly under that radar. And yeah, so it's a process.
But you definitely think there are ways that you can hide that from others, but still somewhat feel a little bit of yourself.
Um, yes, there are ways of expressing, and it depends on who you're around. For me, it's like being a chameleon. If I'm with a macho guy, I don't feel comfortable exposing myself. Well, I'm gonna I'm going to be the chameleon. I'm going to be that that guy for you. But what I most shot for was meeting people who I most identified with and that would be women. Women, they are more accepting, more willing to hear my story and say, "Wow, I would love to know more about that. Why don't you tell me?" So that helps to bolster your confidence in yourself. It's like, wow, if like my story, resonates with this, cisgendered woman, I could learn from them and they could learn from me. So helping each other out and again, evolving along the way.
All right. So before coming out, we see trans youth, especially, experiencing higher rates of depression, fits of rage to others who are cisgender because they were born in the correct bodies, and 52% of them, according to the Trevor Project, have thought about suicide in their lives because they're trans and they're not in the right bodies. So, how do you suggest to kids to how to cope with being in the closet, and what are some suggestions you have for them to try to overcome that period of time in their lives?
Okay, yeah, great question. I would say, have patience and faith in yourself, the confidence, that you're going to build is a process. It's like, we don't come out of the womb, all of a sudden confident and walking the walk. Know that you are going to have your protagonists along the way. I don't envy today's generations. As back in the day, there's always bullying, in the schoolyard, bullying or whatnot, but it's not like today or in the past 20 years, whereas people hide behind the keyboard and think that they can say anything to you, and it can be very hurtful. Very hurtful. Always be mindful that you will have a protagonist out there, but you'll have plenty of antagonists, I should say. You'll have your antagonists out there along the way, but you also have your protagonists. Find those people and lean on them. If they're any friend, they will help you through your issues. Find the advocates in school. There's a teacher on that staff. I guarantee you, at least one of them is going to be empathetic with you, or may even be family. Somebody in the LGBTQ spectrum. But you want to listen to those positive influences in your life and try to, walk away from trouble when it presents itself. You're not obligated to teach anybody anything. I just happen to like to do that, and deal with the fallout, afterwards. Keep a level head. Don't get too emotional. If somebody doesn't understand where you are on the gender spectrum, time will heal everything. We all mature. Our thoughts, our emotions mature, blossom, evolve. So I would say be patient in your transition. Again, that's why they call it a journey, folks. It's a process. It's going to, roll out in front of you, and you're going to have to deal with those people along the way.
Okay. Now, kind of moving right along to understanding really what transgenderism is in the whole process, and you talk about the journey. So I think it's important to talk about that journey, step by step, and with it, I want to talk about, we a lot of times we talk about socially transitioning, medically transitioning, the whole process defined in two terms, but obviously it's not just a two-step process there. So I was wondering if we can walk through from the very beginning of you start to feel like you're the wrong gender to you're fully transitioned. Maybe you don't want to go the medical route, but maybe you do. So what each step is, what are the legalities of it, how young can you do that step, and what's the cost in that step, how much can insurance pay for, how much do you have to pay for out of pocket, what does that step feel like to go through? Because that's a lot of times forgotten in our activism is, what does it feel like to go through that? Like, what does it feel like to be dead named? What does it feel like? And how difficult is it? And finally, how long does that process take? So I know there's a lot in there, but step by step, step one, what is that first?
Well, I had got that's a great multi-tiered question. So I will start from the beginning. Again, when I was a child, knowing what I liked, what I saw in front of me as I grew older, uh, admiring the women in my actual life, my two grandmothers, my mother, uh, other strong women that I'd seen on television, back in the day. I was certainly growing up through the the very infancy of the women's lib movement, so I admired those strong women, and I really felt their pain. It's like, and I related, to them. Um, so knowing that about myself, I would say, okay, I'm kind of on the path to womanhood here, because I don't like doing the things that my brothers do. They go hunting, they go fishing, and those things, that they like to do, that's fine. I just like to stay back in the kitchen, learn how to cook a meal, keep the home nice and spick and span, run the vacuum, wear an apron, whatever the case may be. It is an evolution. Again, I'll use that phrase quite a bit throughout this whole talk. As I got older, um, the epiphanies that I had in my lifetime that were the telltale sign that this is valid, folks. And I'll just briefly say that my second epiphany in my lifetime, and off camera we talked a little bit about my first epiphany as a child, and seeing my neighbor's older brother. My second epiphany came when I was in the Air Force, a young man of 19, and going to my first gay bar. And um, it's a song from my era, guys. It was by the Kinks, and it was called Lola. And this rolled out for me exactly. She came up to me and she asked me to dance, beautiful woman. And I'm in a gay bar, and I'm 19, and I'm at the height of my hormones just raging and whatnot. The sexuality is oozing or whatever. I thought to myself, wow, look at me go. I come here and I end up with this beautiful woman. Well, 5 dances into it, into the whole meeting process. I look at my friend who's tending bar, who invited me to the gay bar to start with. He's from Pottsville, came down to Hampton, Virginia, Norfolk, Virginia, actually, to get a summer job and hang out at the beach with me. And I saw him, he told me later on that, that woman used to be a man. I'm like, it could happen. It became a truth to me. So it is it's a rolling out of many things throughout life, where you start to put yourself together at this point, going, all right, let's practice being the gender that I'm obviously excited about being. So as a young person, I without the benefit of YouTube and the many trans influencers that are out there that we literally watched evolve before our eyes. We didn't have that. So this was my YouTube influencer moment in 1982. So that was a different experience than what it was when I moved out to Southern California and started hitting the West Hollywood scene and developing to a more mature version of Mikaela. Knowing that I'm balancing. It's a very delicate balance, folks. I really had to play 2 roles. One was the business person who went out and, drummed up business for the company that I worked for, helped to start up out in Southern California. And then softening it up at night, heading out on the nights that I didn't have my children to worry about or to watch or to, take somewhere, which, I was a very active parent. I had my moments where I was, finding Mikaela, refining her. What clothes does she like to wear? Growing out the hair, as a matter of fact. And I grew it quite long in my years, even as a sales rep for an aerospace company out in Southern California. It didn't, nobody really, batted an eyelash at that, So I got to develop along the way, each level being a different challenge, and it was a whole different set of challenges as I came back after 20 plus years of being away, coming back to Schuylkill County, and evolving even further as a more mature, person, a more mature woman. It's like not over dressing, not over emphasizing. It's like, at my age, I'm not going to, go to work in a mini skirt and 6-inch, stiletto heels. I'm reeling it back to little kitten heels and a conservative, nice suit or whatever the case may be. And I would say it's a delicate balance along the way when you're expressing your gender identity. So that's about it.
So one of the steps in the first initial process of socially transitioning is choosing your name, and certainly there's a legal cost to that of doing it. But one of our students has a beautiful question of, how do you choose that name? Is it always based on the first letter of your dead name, or is it just something that you're drawn to? How do you choose that?
Wow.
And what's the cost in doing that? How long does it take?
Okay. I wasn't Mikaela out in Southern California. I just used that because that's my chosen name now. I've settled on that. Again, evolving. I did take a derivative of my dead name, which I'm proud to say was Michael. And I just looked at the feminine version of Michael. It was Michelle. So for, a good handful of years, I really went by Shelley, and I kind of liked that. I thought it was cute. I thought that kind of fit me. I still wanted to honor my parents, naming me Michael. So I just used that variation. Mikaela is still very much the variation of Michael. Sounds a lot like it. My birth name given to me was Michael Allen. So I chose to use the middle name Lynn, as it flows with Mikaela Lynn. It almost sounds like Michael Allen, So I chose that. So it's a process again. Everything's such a process. But it is, and I've settled on Mikaela. I just thought I saw that name out there in the world. I'm thinking I'm more of a Mikaela than a Shelley, I think. So I'm going with Mikaela. So I stuck with Mikaela now for, a good 4 years. And I like it. I've settled on it. It suits me. It suits my personality. Find your personality, know your personality, and name yourself anything you want to. If you thought it was cute, if it was influenced by a favorite cartoon character, a favorite doll throughout your life, or, whatever it is, go for it, see if it suits you. If it doesn't, change it, but when it becomes the legal part, that's another part of this question. It is a process. It is filling out certain forms. You want to save up some money because it's rather expensive. The court cost could be about $300, and then the process that the courts have to go through to make sure that it's all legal and such. There's I believe that there's a notification. It has to be made public in your newspaper, and the newspaper will charge you yes, it is. They do charge you, and it could be rather expensive, but there are ways of having those expenses waived, adjusted. So I've been told, but the court cost, the court time it takes is sitting in front of a judge. The judge will say, okay, we can see no ill reason for you changing your name other than this is who you identify as, and the court will throw down the gavel and say, you are Mikaela Gaveletz. You go through the expense of getting your driver's license changed and your gender marker changed on your driver's license, which I've done recently, and your birth certificate. So that is a process, and it takes a little time and money, and it could cost you, upwards of $1,000, but in the long haul, it's well worth it. You got all your legal paperwork changed. You can now change your bank accounts, your the title of your car, whatever it is. It's a time-consuming thing. So be prepared to spend a lot of time on this. It's not an overnight process.
I'll be honest. Like, we're just at step 1 of changing your name, which is the most basic gender expression thing you can do.
Yes.
and we're already at $1,000 basically, and a lot of time investment. That I genuinely didn't even look up the cost of being trans because I wanted this interview to be fresh to me. But that shocks me. Of just we're not even halfway there yet, and we're already at way more than I thought it would be.
That's true. Now you're transitioning.
Yeah. How do you deal with people who might see you as impatient or rude when you correct them on your pronouns or your preferred name?
Well, people are, in my case, have been very apologetic every time they use my dead name or, use the wrong pronoun. It's a learning curve for them too, especially if they'd seen you, prior to your transition. Allow them to do that for a little while. Give them that padding. I did. And it makes everybody so much more comfortable, because it is, they feel like they're walking on eggshells with you now. They don't want to say anything wrong, but it slips. It's going to happen. It's happened to me 100 times. I just, brush it off my shoulders. It's like, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Do try to exercise a little, understanding and patience on your behalf too, because after all, you want them to understand you. So it's a give and take, that's the best advice I could offer.
I mean, you mentioned when someone names you as your dead name. Certainly, again, I don't know how that feels. So just for a second, can you walk me through what emotions go through your head when that kind of thing happens, when someone dead names you? How does that feel? How emotional do you get when you know that they can do better?
Well, I can't say that I'm unaffected by it. It does. It is a little bit of a jolt, and in as much as it's like, oh my God, who just heard you say that? Do you just outed me in front of people that I don't know? And that can be a dangerous thing. So yeah, there's concern. I would say I do get jolted. I'm not impervious to feeling that my dead name being used is hurtful in a way. They can do better. They can try, because although there are, in my case, there are women in the world who are named Michael. I realize that could be a fem name, but for me, it's not. I always related it to, the male that everybody throughout my whole life wanted me to be or expected me to be. Or so yeah, it is. It is a process, though. Understand that people are learning too, and it may slip. And you have a lot of people too that will immediately say, "Well, what do I call you? What's your name?" And so you tell them, and they may use a variation of that because they feel comfortable. Like some of my male cousins, although they love me and they accept me, they see me as Mick. Mikaela is Mick. So I'm like, I'm cool with that. That's all fine, So I'll allow people to have that flexibility in a way.
And have nicknames, sort of.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
All right. So another great question we got on socially transitioning is, how do you socially transition with a transphobic family compared to an accepting family? Like, what are the differences there?
Okay. For me, I have to say that transitioning with a family who wasn't willing to accept my decisions, try to talk to them and say, express to them how much time in your life you've lived for them to satisfy them. And at the end of the day, we have to look at ourselves in the mirror. We have to be happy with what we see in the mirror. Be true to yourself. Be ready for loss, because you're going to go through a grieving period, a feeling of loss of a son or of a brother, or a loss of a sister who's now transitioning to a brother. It is a grieving process for them. Understand that. Be as compassionate to them as you expect them to be to you. That old saying, do unto others. For me, it was knowing that I could lose them, and coming to terms with that. And I wasn't far off the mark. I knew going into this for many, many, many years that there's a possibility that I'll lose somebody along the way. And I have. And it's sad. But then you hold out hope that they'll come around. Don't ever try to shove an issue down their throat. Let them take the time to wrap their head around it, to absorb it fully. And when they're ready to talk to you about it, they will. They will. I'm still going through that process with a couple of people in my family.
I think the next chapter that a lot of people see is what is commonly known as the in-between space between socially transitioning and medically transitioning. And this is the space where your gender expression doesn't match your gender identity yet, but it also doesn't match your sex assigned at birth still. So lots of trans people describe this as the worst phase of transitioning. Do you have any advice for those going through this time period in their lives, in that in-between phase?
Yeah, it's intense. I'm not going to lie. You will get knots in your stomach. You will literally throw up thinking about it, because it will make you very nervous. That's quite natural because you don't know what the response of somebody is going to be, and that could be quite scary. So know your territory, and where you're going into that transition between, trying to come out to them in a somewhat ubiquitous way, uh, dropping hints, being subtle, showing them little traces of this and that. For me as a child, it was picking the flowery, puffy, shirt over. And in the 70s, we had those things. So it was easy. I could wear silk and flowers, nowadays, not, you don't get away with that too easily. Um, but that those little touches along the way that you hope that your family, your parents, your brothers, your sisters will pick up on and question you, so you can tell them what you're thinking. You would like to think that family comes first, that they would work with you and understand, but it's not all that cut and dry. It's a loss for them, a loss of a brother, like I said, or a loss of a sister, a loss of a father in my case. The way that my children might view it. Uh, so it is. I gotta say, you've just got to be patient and understand where you're going is not always an easy place to go. There will be loss and heartache and a lot of crying along the way. I promise you, it's not going to be easy. But stay strong, stay true to yourself, stay hopeful that one day it will iron itself out. They'll come to you and want to know if they truly love you. That will happen. So know that that there could be that light at the end of the tunnel.
You mentioned fathers and parents, and so I wonder, as a researcher purely here, um, do you find it in your research where fathers are less accepting than mothers in general, or is it what sort of relationship there, as well as like brothers and sisters? Are brothers more non-accepting than sisters are, and so on?
I have found that girls are more accepting and quickly. I mean, it's just, don't even think about it. It's like, oh my God, I love you even more. Whereas brothers, or fathers, they raised you to this point where they wanted you to walk the walk of a male. Maybe they're doing it to protect you because they know you'll get hurt if you weren't that strong, macho type. If you, back in my days, it was, you don't want to be a sissy. Uh, yes, I did. I very much did. But I didn't want to express that to them. So, you're hiding in that closet for a reason, because, you don't want to get, beaten up or bullied or even questioned, because, as a child, you don't have all the answers. I mean, it took me years of research to come up with the answers to, the questions in this particular interview. So, use, you learn in life constantly, so you learn how to deal with certain personalities in certain ways. It could be in a joking way. It could be in a very, very serious way. It could be, um, bringing it up, as a family unit. That wasn't in my cards, but there are so many different ways that that you could put that signal out there that hopefully people in your family will respond to.
I love the answer so far. Oh my god. So kind of moving on to the medical phase now. And at this point, we know that trans people can go in one of two routes after they socially transition. They can either choose to medically transition in any form of medically transition, or they can choose to just socially transition and that's it. And they just continue to wear the appropriate clothing, they go to the right restrooms, and they just get called the appropriate name and pronouns. Because some people are scared of the surgeries or the hormones yet, because there's not enough historical data yet on those. Even the most experienced doctors in this industry will tell you that there's not enough historical data. And so with that in mind, what do you feel about that? Like, is it okay for a trans child to choose that's not the route they want to go yet? Because we also have heard that, puberty is not reversible, but puberty blockers put a pause button on it until you can make that decision as an adult. Is it okay for children to go through puberty and to let that happen, even though it's not reversible to the wrong gender?
Wow. Yeah, that I wish I had the ability to, put a stop to testosterone entering my body, because once you reach that point, it is hard. You can't reverse it. Bone density, certain features, your voice. Could be as much as that, an Adam's apple evolving, or, maybe a brow bone protruding a little bit too far that eventually you're going to have to get shaved down because it looks more, feminine. Facial feminine surgery costs a lot of money, guys. So catching, yourself before puberty is paramount. And I would say to make an absolute seamless transition into being a young girl, because you will develop, as such. You won't get the musculature that once that testosterone kicks in, you're going to be stuck with for the rest of your life. Can't reverse it. Some things through surgery, but it is expensive. Look into the facial feminizing surgeries and such, or perhaps in a trans man's case, pectoral inserts or whatnot. I mean, there's more fine tuning, I think, that goes into male to female than female to male, because testosterone does a heck of a job on your body. So does estrogen to a male body. There's a lot of changes that occur, but estrogen and the use of other hormones will not reverse the size of my hands, the size of my feet, my bone structure now. It just won't reverse it. And my voice. Now my voice is matured. It's, the vocal cords have relaxed. I have those lower tones now. Whereas, early pubescent, you'll maintain that high register. The vocal cords will not, develop as a male. So there's some things that are reversible too. However, when you start getting later on into transition and you go from puberty blockers, and now you're 18 and you could be prescribed estrogen and progesterones, whatever you're doing. I'm not advocating, either for you. Listen to your doctor, your endocrinologist. They'll recommend what's best for you. But be prepared if you want to have children, down the pike. You could go to a sperm bank, have your, have that done. Preserve it, because once you go so far into estrogen treatments, there's no coming back. You will be sterile. So there is a window of a period, which is 8 months. So if those that are transitioning, you want to dabble and you decide perhaps hormones aren't right for you, do it before that 8-month mark, because you're now at the point of no return. You will not be able to reproduce as a male if that's what you want to do. Crazy things in this world, but no, do a little research and find a lot out, from your doctors. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not advocating any advice here, but that's the way it is.
but certainly you know more than I do, and so that's why I love your insight on this. I mean, one of one of the things you mentioned to me a while ago was truly one of the most beautiful things that changed how I became an activist. Um, sorry, I'm getting teary. This is a very emotional moment. But we were on a phone call before the Pride event last year, which you organized, and you mentioned to me that as a gay man, I can take off my rainbows, and if I don't want people to know I'm gay for the day, I have that option, and I can pass as a straight man. Whereas for a transgender person, they don't have that option, and immediately my mind went to a trans person in the bathroom, like, or in their bedroom, and it was the one safe place in my life where I could be gay and I didn't have to hide that part from me anymore and hide it from my family. Whereas for a trans person, they look down and they don't see the right parts, and it makes me tear up because that feeling must be just terrifying for a young kid, especially, um, and let alone the transphobia that they're bound to see online or elsewhere in the world. It just they have enough internal problems to face with that, and so do you feel like there are certain times when a trans person has to hide their gender, and if so, how do you go about hiding who you are?
Wow.
I know that's hard,
That
hard
is
question.
that's a deep question, and again, I have to say that I play every scenario like you're always having to adapt to the environment around you. There are times, I won't lie, where I see a credible threat around me, whereas, you know what, I have no recourse but then to just try to dash and hide. um but for the most part, um I feel that I may have assimilated, well enough into society where people don't clock me or read me or anything, where I feel secure and confident about myself. Again, I'll keep on going back to that word, confidence in yourself and knowing who you are. And it is a process. It's nothing that's going to happen overnight. Knowing who you are and standing up straight and just facing your demons. Sometimes you have to do that. You can't dash and hide like sometimes I've done up at Boscov's, when I worked for them. I it's scary. You never know how people are going to react. So um again, it is knowing your environment, the environment that you're in, and knowing yourself and your capabilities, your limitations, and you know keeping confident.
Beautiful answer. And uh, truly, I just want to take a quick moment because the words you said to me in that phone call way back in the day, I considered myself an ally of the trans community for a long time, but that's when I really started, especially on the show, diving into let's cover this because this is, I never thought about that side of things of like, yeah, you don't have any safe space where you can go to hide, and that changed everything for me, truly. So I want to thank you for that. But uh, with body transitions, let's
Yes.
transition our conversation into the medical side of things. And we've touched on it before in the interview, but one of the things that kids especially would have the question on where, with medically transition, a lot of it is diagnosed and a lot of it is determined by a therapist.
Correct.
And so where do people go to find one of these gender therapists, and what do you even search for?
Well, I would look under endocrinology to start. It's just that word. See who's in your area. It just happens to be that when I moved back here from Southern California, there were still no endocrinologists that dealt with trans issues within 100 miles of this area. So you had to be prepared to, go way out of town. It's gotten easier in quite recent years. LVHN down in Allentown has a gender center now, which is perfect. I mean, that's only a 45-minute drive to get there to that facility. And it's lovely to have an endocrinologist, on staff, somebody who understands the trans phenomenon, that the transitional phases. I would also, well, before taking that step, you're right. You must get a letter of recommendation from a certified psychologist. That's a process that's going to take at the very least 6 months, 8 months to evaluate you. That's, again, going back to expenses. Let's add that in. In my case, it was covered by insurance. It may be covered by your insurance as well. So I was able to have those sessions, and within 6 months, I had the therapist writing me a letter to my primary care doctor asking for recommendations for an endocrinologist for me. So it is a process. You must, everything's a process. And like I said, and when you're transitioning, the Harry Benjamin standards of care are still in play. So the rule there is 2 years living in that was 4, but I meant 2, in your perceived gender, living a solid 2 years, 24/7. And then if you choose to go the gender confirming surgery route, you're covered. According to Dr. Harry Benjamin's standards, you're good to go. I mean, if you can live solid 2 years in your new gender, you will get that letter to then go on to the next step. Not everybody goes to it, but that's up to you. It's an individual thing. If you feel that you can live your life with, what you were brought into the world with, a lot of people do. And like you brought that up earlier about the various stages of transitioning. Some people choose not to go under the knife. Others, it's a do or die situation. So that balance.
With a psychologist, is that just any psychologist that you can find in your area, or is it a specific one that you have to find?
Well, it would be more specific in the way of behavioral psychology. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And like I mentioned to you earlier off camera, things have evolved to a point where it's getting, streamlined down to having a friend, a new friend since Pride, somebody who is a psychologist dealing specifically in the transgender world. So now you might be able to look for them specifically. But for me, I was I went in looking for behavioral psychology, female. I just, because it always seemed to me that, the females have a more understanding ear. And I felt comfortable talking to, because that's who I related to. I could talk like, more comfortably and more out and direct to another female, because that's just the way I was wired.
And when we talk about this, like after the point of finding a psychologist, which again, 6 months, it's a long process, and it adds to the cost if insurance doesn't cover it. We hear about these gender programs in hospitals, and you mentioned the one sort of near us, but where do you go about finding those programs? Are there a lot more than there used to be back in the day, or how easy it is to find them?
Yeah, I believe that they're easier to find these days with the wealth of information that's out there on the internet. And there are organizations locally. There's a chapter in Harrisburg, chapter in Allentown, social groups where a lot of information is revealed through them. As you might go to the outings, the meetings and such, and they'll have guest speakers arranged that'll tell you about their services, or maybe there's a list of services that as resources that they'll share with you. So becoming involved in those kind of organizations is not a bad idea.
Now, my guess on this is after you get recommended to an endocrinologist, the first step with them would be something like a puberty blocker for a younger person.
Yes.
And maybe it's different for someone who's transitioning later in life, but my guess is that's the first step after that. So walk us through, what is a puberty blocker? Is it an injection? Is it a pill? How often you have to take it? And what is the cost in that? How long are you on those, kind of thing?
Wow. Well,
I asked tough questions there,
but they're very good questions, and very everyone has an answer. There are things that you can take. It depends on your doctor what they recommend. In my case, it's a drug that I think is commonly known as it's used for something like blood thinning. So I really forget, but it's called spironolactone. And what that does, it's a hormone inhibitor. It'll suppress the production or the secretion of testosterone, from your gonadal system. You could also go and have an orchidectomy, where that's the process of having your testicles removed. The main reason why you're secreting testosterone is, in your gonads. So an orchidectomy is a route that some go. Again, I'm not advocating this because, later on down the road, if you decide to go for the full vaginoplasty, that skin that is, included in your testicular area is used to create certain parts, certain features of the vagina. So you don't want to be, with an orchidectomy for too long, because, parts atrophy, parts, shrivel, and it's no longer usable material. They'll have to probably get something from somewhere else when they do the labiaplasty. So things could be, to inhibit the production of testosterone. Finasteride. There's other drugs, I believe, that are used commonly for male pattern baldness that it inhibits testosterone to some degrees. So for me, it's spironolactone and a Gorsalin implant in my lower abdomen, and that almost completely kills the testosterone. So my testosterone level, as we talked about this earlier, when we were talking about participating in sports against a cisgendered woman or whatnot, it's like, these hormones work in strange ways. Decreased muscle mass, strength, the redistribution of fat cells in your body to settle in places that are more likely to happen with cisgendered females, breast growth, skin softening, hair reduction, is not on your face though. That's the terrible part, that, going on puberty blockers, the facial hair thing, because then you have to go through the expensive and painful process of electrolysis. Thankfully, I was not blessed with, facial hair. I'm very grateful for that. I think there's a reason why I am who I am. It's because, God created me this way. I'm thankful for that.
And I just want to touch on the orchiectomy, or you mentioned?
Orchidectomy, yes.
I'm sorry. With that, before we get that in the comments from some transphobic person, can you get that surgery before you turn 18 or 16?
I would say not, because that's part of your gender, confirming surgeries. Of course, they take those out and they fashion, the walls of your vagina with certain tissues, and like I said, labiaplasty. that skin
Because
is
from
removed. So you might want to hold off, get an orchidectomy until you're absolutely sure it's not that phase you're going through, that this is the route that you're taking, and you're willing to push yourself to the point of no return. You've got to be confident that that's where you want to go with your life before you go getting any surgeries. So that's usually reserved for consultation with your therapist. You will tell your therapist is like, this is where I'm going with my life. I am heading for gender reaffirming surgery. So we know where we want to go.
Because from what I've heard, surgeries or anything under the knife is reserved for after 18.
Correct.
Period. And that's where a lot of people get confused of the legalities of this. And there's a lot of transphobic people who will try to scare lawmakers, especially into, well, they're going to chop off the penis of a 5-year-old.
That's right.
It's
not going to happen, folks. Not going to happen. Again, well, I will bring up the Harry Benjamin standards. They are ironclad. This is what everybody goes by. It has been for a long time, and it always will be. So there are plenty of hoops that parents must jump through in order to give their son or their daughter what they desire, what they know is to be themselves. So yeah, there are no gender reaffirming surgeries done under the age of 18 that I'm aware of. Yeah, it's just not happening.
And when we talk about the things under 18, right? We hear the differences between puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, and advocates will say that puberty blockers are completely reversible.
Yeah, they are.
And the cross-sex hormones are the point at which you decide, and suddenly it's not reversible. And that's where a lot of these people like Rand Paul will try to scare people of, you take a puberty blocker, all of a sudden you're a woman, and that's it, and there's no coming back from that first initial shot, So walk me through, like, what kind of differences are there between the cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers? Are puberty blockers reversible? Are cross-sex ones reversible? Walk me through that.
The puberty blockers or the hormone inhibitors are reversible, and that's why physicians have no issues with putting a younger transitioner on them. For me, just taking the testosterone inhibitors was a huge psychological boost to just euphoria and happiness, knowing that is the gateway to everything else. Although you're going to have to wait, for those cross-sex hormones, because those are the ones that are going to make the irreversible changes after a certain period of time, like I mentioned. So if you're thinking you're going to dabble, be prepared and know that you're going to reach that point of no return. Be ready for that. Cross-sex hormones will change your appearance, your physical outward appearance. This is the skin you're going to be wearing 24/7. Be ready to embrace that skin. Know that you're, ready to embrace that skin that you're going to be wearing on the outer side. It's a happy moment. For me, it was euphoria. That place where everything now aligned and everything seemed right. I was so happy, that I was finally had all of the hormones coursing through my body, making those changes that I yearned for since I was a child. Like I said, my cartoon influences. It was, it's different for everybody, but very much hardcore the same, in as much as 18 is that marker year. You can take those hormone blockers to assure that you're not going to develop that strong masculine jawline, or your voice is going to drop, or those the facial hair. That's a horrible thing. If you want to be a girl and you start seeing little bits of mustache or or chin hair, starting to sprout. You don't want that to happen. So yeah, be mindful.
I mean, when we talk about medical, beyond the puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, the next step, at least in my research, is the first parts of surgery. And I know certain insurance companies would cover it, but uh, we don't have to name all of them because there's certainly a lot of surgeries that people can take, and they can choose that on their own with their endocrinologist, and that's a personal decision. But
Yes.
when we look at the overall transition, how much are we looking at if you had to cover it all on your own?
Wow.
And how long of a process is that overall?
Okay. Good
Like,
question.
like total.
Yes. It normally it would be about the same amount of time as it takes for a cisgender or natal girl to go through puberty development. As you may hear the term blossoming into a young woman. I like to joke that once I started my transition out in Southern California, um, at that time I was about 46, 47 years of age. I used to joke that I was a 13-year-old, 47-year-old, because I'm going through that puberty. You actually really go through that second puberty. You start to develop the way that cisgender girls and women develop. You go through those same growing pains. So yeah, it's a process that usually can play out up to 2 years, 3 years, the same amount of time it takes for a cisgendered girl to develop.
And I mean, obviously, puberty in a cisgender person doesn't really have a cost other than, buying bigger clothing so that they can grow into, or tampons, or so on and so forth. Um, but for a trans person, it's monumentally more if insurance won't cover that.
Yes.
Are we talking more like $5,000? Are we talking more like $500,000?
Oh, no, 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 not five. You're talking more probably along the lines of, the $5,000 range. Through life, you're never going to stop paying for those hormones. Hopefully you have insurance that'll cover those, so they can get pretty expensive a year. Again, for me, estrogen I know is not really that expensive anymore. Maybe it'll cost you about $20 a month, but then you're taking, uh, hormone inhibitors like spironolactone in my case, which could cost roughly about the same amount of money, $15 to $25, depends on where you are per month. So now you're up to about $50, $60 a month just for those if you're paying out of pocket. Uh, Add in perhaps a lot of people don't encourage it. By people I mean endocrinologists are still trying to figure out the ramifications of taking progesterone in a predominantly male body. Introducing that, there are concerns about um, breast cancer or blood clots and things of that nature, because with everything there's a risk. Everything, for me, I've got to watch that. I get my blood taken every 3 months to make sure that there are no clots, make sure that the levels of everything are uh, on pace the way they're supposed to. Make sure those levels are, and they can adjust the levels in your body. For me, I want my estrogen level to be as high as humanly possible and safe, and my testosterone as low as possible, as long as it's safe. So, and they're pretty much delivering that to me. So, yeah, my body's pretty much been going in the direction that I've always knew it would, and it's a uplifting and very happy time for me.
I mean, when we talk about it, it's uh, all in. It just sounds like there's always a big cost to being trans. There's always, not just in money, if insurance, or even with insurance, it's still a hassle to get them to pay for it. But uh, just the time involved in having to think about this seemingly on a daily basis of I need to remember to take that medication in order to stay my true self.
Yeah.
How burdensome is that weight on a trans person?
Uh, a lot of my trans sisters, we go into this thinking that, everything is going to happen overnight. It's you got to be prepared to and know that it's a waiting game. Everything in life really truly is. Anything that's good in life is worth waiting for, and this is going to roll out over a period of years between uh, experimenting with your gender, being comfortable with who you are, how you're presenting, uh, how the hormones are now kicking in and making those changes, outwardly. You want to make, those adjustments and, roll with those punches. They're good punches, albeit, but, it is a time consuming uh, process. Be aware of that and be ready for it. Everything, just exercise patience, 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 patience. Yeah.
And one of the biggest questions that we'll certainly touch on in future chapters here, but there's transphobic people out there who will say that an older man will say that he's trans for the day just to walk into a little girl's room, and which is still illegal. No one's advocating for that, but with it as not as an activist now, just outside of that, we look at that situation and it sounds to me like, all right, it's not so momentary. It's not so much of, oh, I'm trans all of a sudden. It's years,
Yes.
years of thinking of this, years of
Yes.
having to deal with it.
Yes.
And so, forgive me, but everything you're saying in this interview is just tearing down that argument of I can just choose one day to be this way.
Right. The bathroom issue is annoying with me. I've battled, people's transphobic opinions ad nauseum now, and I get a little bit better with each, passing phase, but I've got to tell them, and I do. Do you honestly think that I'm going to go through the pain of loss, of rejection, discrimination, the expense that I put out to make my body the way it is? You think I go through all of this just so I can go into a public restroom? If I'm going into a public restroom at all, I'm going for one reason, people. I don't care. I'm in and out of there. But I also combat those transphobes and homophobes with this. And it's not easy for me to talk about, but we have more of a problem with males molesting children. I was a victim at one time as well. So we have that problem to really deal with. The transgender community is not as big as it seems. We're still a very small percentage in the United States and in the world. Yet there are people out there with their sexual misconduct, and you could be a label yourself as a straight married man. I've seen it. I've lived it. It's a horrible thing. So let's tackle that problem. Let's talk about that problem before you go talking about a trans person walking into a woman's room just so they can molest your child. I'm offended with that. I'm a father, and I wear that title proudly. That's a title that I acquired many years ago. I was viewed as a father. I have two beautiful sons, and I will never want to give that experience back. I have grandchildren, both male and female. How dare you, even imply that I'm doing this so I can walk into a public bathroom. of all things. I try my best to avoid using public bathrooms. They're disgusting, you know. Have you looked at one lately? Yeah, I'd rather not.
I mean, like with that, so two questions. I mean, you mentioned that you're a father. Do your children call you their father, or do they
Not
prefer to
yet.
call you their mother now?
No,
Or
my youngest son who talks to me, he still, you know, calls me pops, and I'm okay. Just call me. You know, the labeling for me, and it's everybody's different, Matt. You know, uh, labeling for me is not a big deal. I don't let that hurt me. I just want the love of the people that I grew up with, that I raised, that I learned with and loved unconditionally. Um, you know, if that's what makes you feel comfortable, you know, I will allow that. You know, going back, I do like the pronouns she, her, hers, um, but I don't want to force that on you. If you're in my life and you lived with, you know, the person before, I'm not going to, you know, crucify you for that. I just want you to, you know, to accept me and respect uh, the person that I've evolved into.
I think it's a personal decision of trying to figure out, does the person you're talking to respect you in general, and you know, any kind of wrong pronouns could be determined off of that and based on that amount of respect. Um, I mean, with the bathroom debate, before we really dive into that, I think it's really important to ask, what is it like being a trans person, and you've gone through a period of time when you've had to walk into male restrooms before you came out fully. What goes through your mind? What kind of emotions are brought up? And the transphobes here will say that you're just acting, and you should be forced to enter that restroom. So what does it feel like to actually go through that?
Well, I could remember uh, going into you know, specifically woman's restroom for the first time in a an office building. Now, there were times where I've gone into them in clubs up in West Hollywood or Studio City, and it's like everybody was on that same page anyway. But going into, and like I said, I try to avoid whenever I can, but there are some times, dear, where nature calls and you've got to answer. So it was a very nervous time for me, very nervous. I didn't know if another woman from the office building was going to, you know, to enter in the same time I was there. Once I was in that stall and the door was shut, all I could see is my ankles. They can't tell, right? Uh, then you got to exit that stall. It was my biggest fear that somebody would come in and clock me. But my very first experience, and I'll never forget it, I'm telling you about it right now. As I exited the stall, another woman walked in. And I'm like, okay, here it comes. Because, you know, I wasn't 100% sure that I wasn't going to get clocked or questioned. But as that woman approached me, she just greeted me like any other woman. It's like, hey, how you doing? How was your day? And you know, me trying to put on my best feminine voice says, oh, it was fine. Thanks for asking. You know, or whatever. You know, so the encounter was very, but you know, nerve wracking at first, but it turned out to be a good one. And ever since then, I've never experienced any pushback, any questioning whatsoever. And I know that it's not that way for everybody because we all transition in a different way. Some, you know, souls, they wish that they could, you know, pass under the radar or be unclockable. Uh, Unfortunately, a lot of late in life transitioners deal with issues like the male pattern baldness and things of that nature, things that, you can't stop unless you're taking, yeah, whatever medications you are to try to reverse it. Some people are born, very bulky, but so are women. We tend to forget that women's bodies come in all shapes and sizes, just like men's bodies come in all shapes and sizes. So crossing over, it may not be a big deal, but uh, going into the ladies' room for me has been something that I don't really look forward to doing, but it happens, and I gotta say, I've not had any conflicts from the fathers waiting outside to whatever, or the husband waiting outside. No issues, and I'm thankful for that. I hate to know that there are people less fortunate who do have to, put up with the bigoted remarks and the hateful remarks and things of that nature. And I'm with you all in that, I wouldn't want anybody harmful in a bathroom with my child. And it's going to happen somewhere along the lines, but I don't. I think that these people who fear it must know that we, transgender women aren't out to do anything other than just to go relieve ourselves and get the heck out of there. It's no big deal.
I mean, it's, forgive me, but a lot of homophobic and transphobic arguments are seemingly similar to what we want, and somehow they use our own arguments against us. Of, I don't want a man in a woman's restroom. I personally, I've gone into gender neutral restrooms, and I don't really care, because I go in there to do my business and I get out. I don't care. But if I had a child, I wouldn't want some big hairy guy next to my little girl, and none of us are advocating for that. But at the same time, they'll use that against us, and it's very effective in their scare tactics. But we also look at, all these situations where, like, we want the same thing as they do, but yet somehow they're using it against us. Like, how well does that work in your opinion, and of that scare tactic, and how do we overcome that?
Well, that is a tough nut to crack. I don't have the answer. I don't know. I have very rarely, if at all, can even recall being in a situation whereas I was going into a restroom with a young child. I'm still very nervous about what that may bring. But then again, I also like to think that, I have a very feminine look that I don't get read, so it's not an issue with anybody. I think I have an appearance that's very welcoming or very gentle or
So you
whatnot.
think,
I'm always smiling, always greeting people, always looking them in the eye and going, I'm just like you. I just want to get in and out of here. No big deal. I'm nervous about it when the situation arises, and it hasn't that I can recall. I kind of dread it a little bit. It
you
might
think
be
that the more that someone can express their gender through clothing and appearance, the less nervous you get when you enter a restroom?
I would think so. I would, if I didn't have the appearance that I was blessed with, and let's say that I was, I look like, a hulking body, strong jawline with the 6 o'clock shadow starting to come in at the end of the day. I would I would be scared. I can't imagine being in that situation. Um, but yet there are trans sisters out there. We all come in different shapes and sizes and body types and such. But the heart and the mind is still there. We're gentle souls. All we want to do is just live our lives the way that we want to live them, and we don't want to hurt anybody. It's like, it's unfortunate that there have been cases, I'm sure, documented, whereas it was a man in a dress. But boy, do I hate saying that, but it could be true. But then again, there's that man dressed as a man who is playing footsies with you underneath the airport, bathroom stall. They're all over the place, and why just single out transgender women who are just trying to go in there and do their business and get out. We'd rather not go in, like I said.
I know one of my friends who's a straight ally, cisgender. She mentioned to me um, that we should be looking at these situations where girls enter restrooms and they bully each other in middle school, and these situations. It's like there's a lot of other problems in the restroom to worry about that we should be dealing with first, bullying included and molestation of people who really want to go in there and molest and assault kids before we worried about a trans person just trying to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, there are problems all over the place. I mean, we're just put what we want to underneath the microscope and blow that up, if you make it an issue.
Sort of along those same lines, we talk about the sports debate, and that becomes the next talking point of a transphobe, because it's never ending with transphobes. It's just you prove them wrong here, and all of a sudden it's the next topic we'll talk about,
Right.
until you just don't have the energy. And so, what kind of advantages or disadvantages? Let's just nip this in the butt for all the transphobes watching. What kind of advantages or disadvantages would a trans person have entering a sports team matching their gender identity?
Wow. I know we talked about this before we came on camera. And I have got to say that when it comes down to sports, it's your dedication to your game. It is training. It is execution of technique, the way that you're coached to execute. It is practice, practice, practice. It is, and that's what wins the game at the end of the day. What I brought up to you, it was me, my experience pre-transitioning, and I was in the best shape of my life in a period of time, whereas I had a very close friend who I played tennis with, who happened to be cisgendered female, and a student at Cal State Long Beach. And I'm gonna tell you, her technique, her dedication to her sport, the tennis team, and I'm a really good tennis player, and I do have a blazing forehand. She handled me quite easily. She was a good player, and I consider myself a very good player too. And me, being a guy at the time, with all the testosterone coursing through my system as nature was allowing, she still took me to school on that tennis court, and she beat me more often than I beat her. It is, it's your passion, it's your dedication, it's the amount of training that you put in is the results that you're going to yield. So I'm also on the same token saying that when a male to female takes cross-sex hormones, it does diminish your strength. It does. You do decrease in musculature. There are some things that we won't change. We won't change the bone density or anything else like that. But in my case specifically, I've noticed the edge that I've lost in throwing, because I still, like to throw a ball whenever I can. And I've gotten weaker with, weight training. I don't lift those weights that I once was capable of. I mean, in a dramatic fashion too, it's decreased. So I got to say my strength has decreased a lot during the use of these past 4 years of cross-sex hormones. So it does its thing, it redistributes fat, puts it in places where, cisgendered women have it, in the hips, in the breast and whatnot. Your skin becomes softer, etc. I mean, not that your skin being soft, has anything to do with, your sports performance, but I've got to say that this whole movement of banning young trans girls from cisgendered female sports is kind of a scare tactic, I think, that the right is using, and in as much as when you start tackling hormones, prepubescent, you're going to develop as a natural born female does. Okay. You're not going to get that initial, musculature that a male were had they, processed through, puberty. Um, you're going to start to develop like a girl, and when you see that, you don't want to develop anymore as a male. So you're consciously inhibiting that. You're dieting and you're exercising to maintain that petite little body, or whatever. I never had that benefit. I went into puberty. I went into masculinity, the full range of maleness. Thankfully, like I said, I was blessed with features that aren't overwhelmingly male, probably more predominantly female. So with the enhancements, makeup and such, you could contour and highlight in certain ways that make you appear even more so. But yeah, the participation in sports is essential and should never be made about gender. What the participation in sports is learning camaraderie, learning leadership, learning respect. So many other things that you can gain from playing sports. It's very important to all young children. So let's not separate because Johnny has a birth certificate that says they were assigned male at birth. In Johnny's heart, Johnny is Joni, and it wants to be treated like Joni, wants to develop like Joni, whatever, So I think this whole scare tactic with allowing trans girls to compete is utter rubbish. It's just ridiculous.
Because it sounds to me like, from the way you put it, if anything, taking these hormones and so on, it puts you at a disadvantage if you were forced into the gender you were assigned at birth, sex you were assigned at birth, in a sport. And so it's almost like these people are trying to force a trans person to have a disadvantage in a way of like, no, you're not allowed to be a normal person and compete, and we're going to make you compete in the sport you have a disadvantage in, rather than competing in the sport that you would be like everyone else and be on the same level playing field. And it sounds to me like it's a lot more about technique in every sense of the word than, and Absolutely. Forgive me, it's sounds to me, not as a parent here, but it sounds to me like parents just get a little butthurt over,
you are right,
my kid didn't practice this hard, so now I'm going to sue the school because that person was trans.
Absolutely. Matt, very well stated. You got it. Yeah, absolutely.
And with it, with the sports debate comes the infamous locker debate of, well, I don't want my daughter to be in a locker room with a man. It's like, again, no one's advocating for that, but it becomes a situation where schools have to deal with it now of, well, because trans people aren't allowed surgeries before 18, and that becomes the whole high school and middle school phase yes. of sports. So they're not transitioned fully yet, and there's no legal way for them to do that.
Correct.
So they're going to have to enter a locker room for yes. the pep talks and so on with the wrong body parts. And so how does the school deal with that? Like, is it a situation where it can be easily go into a stall to change instead of Correct. So on? But there's a lot of people who will also say trans people should have their own sporting teams entirely, or they should have their own locker rooms specifically for that one child in the school.
Wow. You don't want to pull that thread as far as, creating a whole sports league for transgender people.
And forgive me, that is not my personal opinion. I'm just trying to...
No, I know it's not your personal opinion. I know that it's a popular opinion out there, though, that, the locker room debate. And I got to tell you that, as a trans woman, if your interests lie in the same area that your schoolmates, are, you're with a bunch of girls who like boys, You have a trans girl who comes into your locker room who probably likes boys too, who doesn't care what you got going on down there. It doesn't matter to them. They are there to form a bond with you, to become a team, to become one. We're not interested in looking at your genitals. We may have questions about certain things because we need to know. So, um, by the same token, you're right. If there's that a level of no comfort, I go into a drawn, a little area with a drawn curtain or something like. Do your changing. It doesn't have to be, exposed like that. There are precautions, and I'm sure that the trans girl feels very conscious about what they got going on their body, and maybe they don't want you to see them as much as the parents don't want the young trans girl to see their daughter in various stages of undress or whatever. That's not the point. The point is you're there to win a volleyball game. You're there to win a softball game. You're there to bond and be accepted, genitalia aside,
I think there are plenty of ways for a school to deal with these situations and go, let's make that trans person feel as comfortable as possible,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll adapt to whatever they choose they want to do.
Yes.
Let's allow them to, and making the school aware of the situation is important with that.
Yeah, chances are that teammate is going to love you, just
Yeah.
without hesitation.
One of the things I picked up on in your answer there was you're both going to like the same people, and you're going to talk about boys or whatever. With it, we start talking about sex and fertility with transgenderism. And is it more difficult for a trans person to find a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or a partner compared to a cisgender person?
Wow. I'd say yes. I've been involved in relationships in my lifetime, and I never had any problem getting a date as Michael. It's not so easy now, being a trans woman and finding a date. I put myself into a whole different category now. So in my experience, and I'm not saying that there's ironclad research out there to put it all together, but in my view, it's like I see a lot more female to male relationships with cisgender girls than the opposite, a transgender woman with a cisgendered male. That phenomenon it certainly exists, but I've got to say it's probably a little bit more difficult in the dating field being a trans woman than a trans male, because a lot of trans brothers out there transition beautifully into males, and it does, it causes the beard growth, the mustache, perhaps to hair loss. It will happen. It could happen. I've seen a lot of cases, but the physique changes, gets fuller, gets more musculature. It's so that transition in a lot of cases works well for the trans man in getting dates, whereas people like me who've gone through the puberty and the maleness and everything, now we got facial hair to deal with. Not me so much anymore, but or forever for that matter. I never had the battle of the facial hair, but there are those that do. They have to go get electrolysis before they can look smooth and whatnot. It's just it's a process, and everybody has a different experience. But even for somebody who never had a problem, getting the girl, as Michael, I just do not find it to be as easy as Mikaela and finding that perfect mate.
I mean, one of the things we talk about in relationships is sex. And I know this is a delicate topic for some in our audience, so there's going to be a trigger warning here. But with it, we know that some of the side effects from cross-sex hormones make it easier for the vaginal wall of the transgender males to get a sexually transmitted infection. Another possible side effect is the lowered sexual desire in general.
Yep.
So it has a lot of trans people wondering, especially in our comments, who don't really have the resources for this. If they start puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones, is that always the case, or is it more difficult to have sex as a trans person?
Well, very good question. I've got to say, in a lot of cases that I've studied, and certainly in my own case, sex drive, libido, as it were, wiped out. I'm about at that level of a cisgender woman who doesn't have that much testosterone, whose sex drive is just about zero. As a male, I thought about it a lot. I thought about sex a lot. Now, having 4 years into cross-sex hormones, and of course still the testosterone blockers, there are months that I go without even thinking of sex. So yeah, be prepared. Your sex drive, your libido will substantially decrease. Functionability, it depends on your partner. You could pretty much still have sex. If you still have your male parts, they will work to a certain degree. I've got to tell you, and again, like Matt said, it could be a trigger warning, or it could be maybe I'm stepping out of bounds, but the production of sperm and male secretion ceases to exist. It doesn't happen anymore. For me, it's more of an internal full female explosion that occurs in my body within. It does. It makes some changes in your life. And I'm sure with the female to male, cross-sex hormones, it does the opposite. Probably bolsters that sex drive and probably makes you want to have sex more and more. As somebody who stood on that side of the fence, I know how that feels. But it's comforting for me to know that I'm at that level now of a natal woman, and that's what I chose to be. That's the fallout and the ramifications that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. I'm okay with that. I chose it. That's what I wanted.
So you're saying that risk of a lowered sex drive is worth it because every day you get to live your true self now, basically.
Yes.
I'm trying to summarize those beautiful words that you've already. So we mentioned it earlier in the episode, but if someone wants to have a biological child one day, at what age can they start preserving their fertile cells or reproductive cells?
Well, we all develop differently. If you ever recall, seeing some girls in middle school that have developed, far beyond those of others. We all develop differently. So I can't really answer that question intelligently. I don't know what that age would be. I would think that once you've crossed that point in your life of your puberty, and let's say you have that first nocturnal emission, I think you're then at that point, 13, 14 years old. If you're absolutely certain that you are going to be headed toward the cross-sex hormones, I would question. I would get the answers from a doctor's, like, can I, store my sperm for future, application. I may meet somebody who I want to have a child with, a natural born child. You could do that. The puberty blockers, once you go off of them, puberty blockers or hormone blockers, once you go off of them, probably about a good 3 to 4, maybe 6 months tops, you'll be able to produce sperm again that you can reproduce once again. So that is totally reversible. But again, like I said, with cross-sex hormones, once you start those, you cross over that 6 to 8 month threshold.
Yeah, there's that time period.
Over. Yeah.
And certainly that's something you want to talk to your doctors about. And
yes. I'm not a doctor. I don't know that. Yeah. Absolutely. I don't know when it will happen for you, but
that's just something that came through our comment section. I'm like, I'll ask it,
Sure.
But I mean, with it, I know there's a lot of trans people that don't necessarily want to reproduce with those cells because that's not their true gender then. And it's just a personal decision that you make.
Yes. We're all different.
So one of the things that a lot of people I don't think cover in a trans documentary or interview is detransitioning, because it's a dangerous topic.
Yeah.
Because there'll be people that go away from this and think that there's certainly these articles out there to scare people of everyone who transitions
Yes.
comes back and detransitions, and there's headlines that read hundreds of trans people detrans, like it, that might be true, but truly when you look at the percentages, only 0.4%, 0.47%, less than 0.5% of people who medically transition will ever consider detransitioning. But as we also know from the same scientific studies, most of them only choose to detransition because of a hostile and transphobic environment that they're living in. What are your thoughts on the detransitioning process, and what do you say to the opposition who will bring that up as a talking point?
Oh, that is a reality. There are people out there who had detransitioned after many years of living life in the gender that they thought they were. And you're right. In most cases, I believe these are people who just can't take the adversity any longer, that they let this eat at them, and they somehow they think that it's hopeless. uh, Maybe they can't get their career back, or and they're tired of living in poverty, which a lot of trans folks do. There's a high percentage of trans people living in poverty, homelessness, and such. So when you're pushed to that brink of breaking, yeah, that's the recourse you take. Unfortunately, some people don't take it lightly. Others are like, okay, maybe this wasn't meant to be, and um, I'm just gonna go back to being unhappy, or maybe that will make you happy again. I don't know. It depends on what your motives are. Everybody's different, and I can't speak for any cases out there because I don't relate to it. I've transitioned. Um, if you're with me, you're with me. If you're without me, I'm sorry. That's not the decision, that I made. I wanted to be with you. So if you want to cut yourself out of my life, that's on you, honey. Uh, so yeah, the strength and conviction within yourself to now persevere and move forward with your new identity. A lot of people don't have that constitution. They crack. They give in to the social pressures, the transphobic pressures. They can't process it. Uh, I like to educate myself at every turn. Learn about the other point of view. Learn, read the studies and such. Be prepared for reality because it will hit you square between the eyes.
And with it, I mean, I know this wasn't mentioned in the notes, but I mean, with transphobia, we talk about all these situations of just blatant disrespect and discrimination. But one of the things that, as an activist, I always talk about is like, is it harder to find a job as a trans person? Is it harder to walk into some place and be served at a restaurant and so on? That comes up in our comment section a lot of how do you deal with it? Is it harder once you?
Well, it could be if you make it that way. There are a lot of companies out there, and especially now, today seems to be a wonderful time to be trans because there are companies, corporations that have programs in place for protections, non discrimination, and things of that nature. They got your back. You look at there's literally lists of corporations out there that certainly are completely inclusive. Um, it's not easy. And I'm not saying that going out into the workforce is going to uh, produce the optimum result that you want. The job, you're going to compete just like everybody else. Um, However, I think there is a little bit of negative influence because you are trans. Uh, you'll always be looked at, as a a little bit of a disadvantage until they learn about you. just like, everything else is a learning curve for everybody, but we're just as capable as anybody else. I mean, I spent almost 20 years in the aerospace metals field out in Southern California. I haven't lost that edge. I haven't lost that ability. Now I've changed. I've transitioned into Mikaela. Um, have my knowledge has not diminished. My abilities to uh, convince you that I'm your person you want to deal with haven't changed. Uh, it's just we have to change the attitudes of people out there, and the only way we do that is doing programs like this to educate. It's not an easy road, people. I'm not gonna sit here and blow smoke. It's not easy to compete as a trans person uh, out in the workforce. Be prepared for rejection, just like you get rejected, in your previous gender. I've lost a lot of job interviews. There's always somebody that's a little bit better than you. Don't always take it as, oh, they didn't hire me because I'm trans. You'd be surprised. But the sad part is that the discrimination does exist out there. A good friend of mine who was a CEO of a company, once it was publicly traded, was questioned by the board about their status as a transgender woman. They questioned how the stockholders might feel, and ultimately that person ended up, stepping down from their post. It's unfortunate, but even on the higher level, in business world, we suffer. But it's all about reinventing yourself, Matt. Uh, I've reinvented myself now that I've become Mikaela, not only through transition from Michael to Mikaela, but career-wise, reinvent yourself. You should always, evolve in that respect too. Whereas now I'm doing my own thing. Having worked in a company that I helped to start up and grow out in Southern California, I was pretty much, my own boss. That's where I feel my path needed to go again, because, I'm just at that stage in my life where it's like, I don't want to have to deal with other people's, feelings or emotions over, who I am. So I do my own thing and become a success at that. So again, it's all about confidence in yourself and your willingness to evolve and grow into the person that you become. You're not the same person that you left behind with the dead name. So be prepared to reinvent yourself. If things don't work out for you in a standard way, find your own path. Just make that work for you.
With it, I mean, certainly this past year, we've both witnessed something just beautiful. And certainly our audience took a liking to Danny speaking at the event. And with it, we saw someone so young and so confident, and we saw what became the Binder Boys.
Yes.
And this group of trans people, very young in life, just
Yes.
knowing who they are. And so, to me, as just this somewhat of an outsider, but as an ally of an outsider, I asked the question, from your experience growing up in the early days of this trans movement,
Yes.
becoming invisible. Not that trans people didn't exist, but all of a sudden now they're outspoken.
Yes.
Do you have hope for the future generations that we will have change and that it won't be such a big deal in years
Absolutely.
ahead?
Oh, absolutely. I see the generations behind me, and the amount of young people who are, more aware of their surroundings, more aware of their personalities. There's a lot more gender fluidity out there amongst the ranks of the younger people. The willingness to embrace it is higher than it's ever been before, I believe. People understand there's the resources that are out there on the internet, I believe, had been found by a lot of people. Mainstream media, everywhere you go, Netflix or to the movies. I mean, mainstream media is really amping up exposure to trans people. In mainstream magazines like Vogue or perhaps Victoria's Secret. Hiring their first trans model. The uh, runway models that are very gender fluid, designers that are promoting it, Procter and Gamble, you know, Dove soap. I mean, whatever. They have trans spokespeople. Pantene is another big one. So the information is out there. The visibility is out there. Young people are more aware of gender fluidity than they ever have been before. There are more trans, people coming out as trans at a younger and younger age. It's mind-boggling. So I think there's hope, for the future that it will become more trans inclusive as uh, the older generations die off. There always be that level of hate out there, though. Uh, that may exist in certain uh, religious factions and such. It's all about what we teach our children and teach your children well. That's all I can say.
You're not going to make me tear up during this interview. Not again. um, um, so you mentioned reliable sources and websites. For the kids out there who really don't have anywhere to turn besides YouTube videos, are there any reliable websites that they can go to for help with learning about this and learning about themselves?
There are websites out there that are available that showcase successful trans women. This is in my case. I don't know what there's out there for the trans man, but in my case, you can find them. If you really do your research, it's right at our fingertips. And a lot of the influencers out there may reveal that information as well. I know they're out, with their own agenda and such, and they want you to subscribe to their channel, et cetera, et cetera. But there are there are sites out there that are very uplifting and very encouraging. I tend to read a lot of law, as far as Lambda Legal is concerned or transgender law is concerned. There's always information embedded in those that are it's positive. We see the fights, that what we're fighting for, pushing the agenda forward and trying to eliminate discrimination as much as we can, or like I said, there's one that I grew up with in a sense was simply, a website called Transgender Women's Successes. I loved looking at that because it had just a history of, trans women who came before me, long before me, and some that are coming up behind me, and the successes that they've achieved in the business world, or in the arts and entertainment world, etc. So they're out there if you look for them. I can't name any specifically now because I just, like I said, I focus on activist issues right now. That's where I put my energy. I don't look for those resources, anymore, but I could just say they're out there.
Yeah. We'll leave some links down below in the description for everyone, including the ones that Mikaela beautifully mentioned. So if our audience has additional questions for you, because even though we've been going for 3 hours now, this has been edited down heavily. Just so you know. But if they have any additional questions for you, where can they find you online to ask you those questions, and can our audience reach out?
Well, I am in the process of working out a website, but for the time being, I do have an email that is simply Mikaela Gaveletz at youthempowermentsupport.org. And, feel free to drop me a note, a question or whatever, and I'll do my best to answer it to the best of my ability.
All right. Well, thank you so much to Mikaela for coming on our show and for answering all of these questions from our audience and from beyond. This has been a great learning experience for me as an ally of the trans community, but also I hope that you've learned quite a bit from this entire interview as well. I know that the full thing is going to be available for you guys as well to research and to learn from the whole thing. We talk about this a lot in our work between the 7 producers on our show and I, and we always say at the end of an edit, if the video isn't up to par, we don't put it out. But if we're looking at that edit and we know that it's going to change the world, that's when we put it out. And that's exactly why I wanted to have Mikaela on the show, because she's a woman that is changing the world. And every time I hear about her doing something or an article in the paper, it truly brings me to tears, because I know how much she's helping kids and how much she's helping the trans community. And
Thank you, Matt.
So thank you so much. And as she said, we want you to subscribe to certain channels. So make sure you like this video, comment down below your LGBTQ friendly thoughts for Mikaela. She'll be going through those periodically and getting motivation from them. Also, check out the Pottsville and Schuylkill County Pride event that she wonderfully ran last year, had me speak at, which is I'm incredibly grateful for. This year, we're going to be broadcasting that entire event for free on our channel again, so you can check that out in July of 2021. We cannot wait to have our cameras there. That is such an amazing event, and I cannot wait to be there in person again. It's just a beautiful environment that she creates there. So with all that said, thank you so much for watching. This has been Powered and Protected by Rainbows with Mikaela Gaveletz, and thank you so much for watching. Have a gay day, everyone, and bye for now. Oh, I love that. That was a beautiful end.
Still not enough rainbows? Click here to see more weekly episodes of Powered by Rainbows, Semester 4, only on MHP TV.